Let's go!
What's up, dudes? Max here. Before we jump into today's video, got to give a big shout out to our official hardware sponsor, which is Quanba. They've been making arcade sticks for an extremely long time, and now finally something that is coming to light and is available that I've been waiting for forever, which is their 2009 arcade stick desk. This also has a fully customizable arcade stick, allowing you to swap out the buttons. It initially comes with silent buttons and a silent joystick, and the ability to mount a monitor to the desk and plenty of space to work with, as well as a bottom carrier space where you can put your hardware, much less your tower, if not other consoles. There's a one-player or a two-player one initially designed for PC, and even on the two-player one, it sends a signal of both arcade sticks out via one cable. It's made of full high-quality metal, and from what we played so far, does not move at all. We're thinking of getting a couple of one-player setups and just putting them side to side, or you can put them head-to-head. And this is something that I've wanted forever, because going back in the day, there's arcade sticks that are huge and massive and emulate the arcade-style sit-down cabinet, even going back to the Sega Saturn. And this is pretty much the full realization of that. It's also fully compatible with the latest Brooks converters, allowing you to convert the signal to consoles if you want. So if you guys want to check out the Quanba 2009 one-player or two-player, there is a link in the description below. Speaking of so much stuff, there is some stuff we were talking about where it seems like we might be on the cusp of like a lot more fighting game things to happen. We were having this conversation a bit ago. The big three came out. So we got Tekken, we got a Mortal Kombat, and we got a Street Fighter. All to varying levels of quality and, you know, everything like that. And it was mostly great. Still, there's a big game, or potentially several games looming in the distance that we do not know about, that seem like something should be happening and has been largely presumed that we're going to be getting something else in the near future. Like, it's seemingly happening. It's just a matter of when and how. It's pretty much Virtua Fighter. Obviously, just to like preface this, there was some pretty big rumor stuff that came out. Again, this isn't directly a leak. It's a rumor at this point because the game has not been announced. There is no official announcement of a Virtua Fighter in any way. But we did get something a bit earlier where the lead developer of Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown was being interviewed about their aspirations for 2024. Their aspirations were specifically just Virtua Fighter, and that was it. So it's like, whoa, okay. So maybe this is maybe 2024 is either the year Virtua Fighter is going to release or possibly is going to get announced in some way. Because to preface that as well, Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown, Ultimate Showdown, sorry, that came out exclusively on PlayStation, did very well. And it kind of kicked Sega in the back of the butt in terms of all of their other marketing stuff that they had been in the works for a long time with that crazy taxi stuff and all these classic games coming back. It sort of was another reaffirmation that, oh, people actually care about Virtua Fighter still. I can't believe we're in this timeline that this is happening. But some pretty notable folks that have been right on a lot of things in the past had some things to say about a Virtua Fighter game in the near future. And I have some thoughts, and some other people have had some thoughts about this. So this is like, again, you have to realize this. 4 years ago, this shit was crazy. The fact that Virtua Fighter could come back in any way and wasn't just dead, completely dead in the background. The fact that somebody showed up and was like, hey, we can do something with VF. It's nuts that a remaster of a Virtua Fighter game could show up in 2021 and be as successful as it was. Actually crazy. Being free on PlayStation was a huge part of it, though. Let me pull up the list and information of what we know as of right now, of what is rumored to be happening with a new VF, because I think it's worth talking about. This doesn't technically classify as a leak as of yet, in my opinion. If there is like an announced project, this could all be complete BS. But if there is an actual announced project that's happening in the future, then, you know, we have, I'll definitely err on judgment of like, huh? Anything that's before this is essentially a rumor of like what is happening and no idea if this is going to come true. So, and it's VF, man. When do we get Virtua Fighter news to talk about anything? So, the first big tidbit is that Virtua Fighter, it is online and esports focused and has online and offline modes, including customization. Not a surprise that VF would possibly have all these things. There would be new characters with a modern art style and a new character artist, which does make sense because Virtua Fighter's roster is probably one of the most like dry and bare bones sort of like character personality archetype characters in like fighting games. I think even more straightforward than a Tekken or a Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat especially. It's almost like you put yourself into the character of a Virtua Fighter character, because Akira is just karate, man. Does he have anything else about him? I don't know, dude. Like the same thing with like Sarah Bryant, the same thing with Shun-Di and like Jeffrey. He's crazy, much less like Native American wrestler guy. They are essentially template archetypes from the 90s. That's kind of exciting that we might be getting a fresh sort of modernized take on what Virtua Fighter characters are, because believe it or not, that hasn't happened since 2005. It's been a game concept that has changed many times since 2021 up until now, which is cool. I've had a lot of presumptions of what VF could potentially be for the future. Streaming and spectating implementation is an important part of this title and a super game concept. So super game is relevant to Sega's big efforts that they've had in the background, where they've been hyping up this big super game, and we don't know exactly what it is, that they've been talking about for quite some time. And it's like a big project, big sort of game. I don't think Virtua Fighter is their super game. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. Streaming and spectating implementation is also pretty sick to me, just because the ability for like Twitch chat to interact in some way with games is really cool. And it seems like fighting games should have something like that, some sort of interaction and reward system. So I'd be very excited if more fighting games did stuff like that in the future. I would be very happy about that. Or it is a reboot of Virtua Fighter series itself, in development by the current Virtua Fighter staff. So that's friggin' wonderful. This is huge. In my opinion, this is massive news. There was one thing that really didn't help the marketing of another fighting game that was about to go into its 6th iteration. And the 6th iteration was a very well-made game, but obviously did not grab audiences the way they hoped, and it was Soul Calibur, another 3D fighting game. I truly felt that Soul Calibur, as well as DOA, Jesus, they needed a reboot around that time frame. It felt like Soul Calibur 6 was already like resetting timeline stuff, and they were going backwards to older designs and old characters. So it's like, dude, you're already doing this. Why do we have to put Soul Calibur 6 at the end of it if you're already taking your roster back to like Soul Calibur 1? What's going on? But they chose to call it Soul Calibur 6, and I don't think that helped the game overall. It just when it was like, well, I didn't like 4 or 5, so I'm not getting 6, you know, type of mentality. Virtua Fighter's been gone for so long and hasn't had a new game for almost 20 years, an actual new game for getting close to 20 years, that yes, this is when you reboot something, bro. Like this is the period of time where you don't call it Virtua Fighter 6 or Virtua Fighter 6 Evolution Tournament Gymnasium. You don't give it a crazy ass title. This is when you reboot VF. VF needs to be brought back for modern audiences in some way. So I very much am completely in line with their thinking here. If this does end up happening, Virtua Fighter has needed a reboot, and I think it's like the perfect time to do that. It's a title releasing on all major platforms with crossplay and rollback. Well, that's wonderful. That all sounds very good. Just to relate to this, what were we saying in some of the previous VF videos for like how do you make VF work in the future? Or VF in the past has always been kind of a pioneering game where it has to do something crazy pioneering. Every single Virtua Fighter game's like this. So even the developers of modern VF were like, hey, we don't want to make a new Virtua Fighter game unless we do something that's pioneering, like the old games. It's like a staple. Virtua Fighter is a series that essentially set industry standards for how video games can be made, right? It's hard to do that with like visuals and stuff like that nowadays. What you can do is connectivity. You can make Virtua Fighter like a truly worldwide fighting game. Creating like a system of online playability and accessibility is something that 1000% can be revolutionized in some way. That if Sega is willing to take that big of a challenge, is worthy of doing so. So I really hope that, talking about it having crossplay and rollback, that one of the big pioneering parts of Virtua Fighter, whatever the heck it's going to be called, would be that it wants to get you to play the game and is going to make that as easy as possible, regardless of where you live or how far away you are. That would be really incredible. This is a Virtua Fighter title developed to be a modern competitor to Street Fighter and Tekken, with esports concepts and mechanics that are similar to current Street Fighter and other fighting games. It is a concept that has evolved a lot. How much that is going to evolve into gameplay, we don't know. Is it going to have some big chunky run your ass forward move? Most likely. It definitely could. But that's the thing, is that VF has remained relatively, like, quote unquote pure. VF has been a pure fighting game for almost its entire existence, man. So I do think, yes, they're gonna, I do think there's going to be some modernization to the mechanics of the game, but it's still going to be VF through and through. And I feel like there's another game that did that pretty well. Maybe not perfectly, but pretty well, and that's Tekken 8. Tekken 8 did a pretty dang good job about giving it all this like new modern crazy buzz and making everything over the top and crazier than it's ever been. But believe it or not, it's still Tekken. Like, it really is. There's a lot of crazy new bullshit you have to be ready for, but your Tekken experience will carry you miles, and you still need to know how to play friggin' Tekken as a result. Here's a pretty huge part, because all this sounds like, oh, this sounds like it could be a giant free-to-play sort of, you know, esports game. It sounds like it could be that at this point, but apparently there's a new main story and side stories with brand new characters. And that's weird to me, because the last thing you think of when you think of Virtua Fighter is a cohesive story. Jeffrey McWild is trying to get revenge on a shark, and he wants to fight him or something. Like, huh? Story and VF don't ever make any sense. Like, does VF had an anime? I couldn't even tell you what the hell happens in it. But to me, that's kind of surprising, where it's like, wow, that's weird. You want to do a story with Virtua Fighter? That doesn't make any sense. And then, oh, wait a minute. What is it? RGG Studio? Ryu Gotoku? What is the actual studio called? RGG is the guys that made Virtua Fighter Ultimate Showdown, right? So if they're the ones, the Yakuza devs, that have like 15 to 20 years of history of making these games with extremely expressive characters, literally the foundation of that game is rooted in Virtua Fighter, rooted back to Shenmue, which goes all the way back to Virtua Fighter. It's like, man, if you get the Yakuza devs to take Virtua Fighter characters and put them in a world together, that sounds kind of amazing. Now you have me like, shit. Okay. Now that seems that could be really interesting in like a hyper Sega-y world in some way. Like, granted, Yakuza already does this, but still, I feel that there's definitely room to share with a game like Virtua Fighter in some way. And then VF4 had all those amazing modes, the arcade tournament world tour thing that it sort of had, which was super fun. Yeah, I can see where you could actually make a lot of really great single-player content around a Virtua Fighter, especially with a crazy-ass story, you know? And especially if it actually, you know, dips into Yakuza characters in some way, which would be smart. You would think that VF would be looking at its direct competitors, which is like Tekken, and maybe not Street Fighter, but Tekken's another 3D fighting game. And how did Tekken get to where it's at right now? Guest characters, bro. Guest characters was one of the largest things that boosted Tekken into mainstream awareness after all of the years of the series being out. It was one of the biggest parts of it. There is an evolution of ranked matches that is similar to modern fighting games, okay? That is a title that is focusing on scaling with the player and their play styles when they play online. See, okay, this is interesting. This is interesting because this means that they're aware of like smurfing and stuff like that. And this goes down to accessibility, where you have like a system and you really need people for this system to work. Granted, you need a lot of matchmaking potential for a system like this to happen. Imagine you're a dude and you're just like, hey, this VF game looks sick. You jump in and then you get like a couple of games against other noobs that are actually noobs and you're having a good time. And then eventually you rank up and you get smashed and you're like, damn, that sucks. This game isn't fun anymore. So there needs to be a system that is like, all right, this guy's gotten smashed a few times. Let's take that into account. There needs to be like an algorithm of potential matchmaking, which I don't think a lot of fighting games do this. Maybe some of them do in the background in some way, but to allow lower ranked players to enjoy the game. This is a skill-based matchmaking thing 100%, because all fighting games have skill-based matchmaking. That's the entire basis of them. But at the same point, actually have a fun-focused matchmaking balance at the start, where you can potentially enjoy the game more, right? And go up against other people that are as coherent with the game as you. I'm mostly thinking of entirely newbies, right? Entirely a situation where you're going to be fighting other folks that are around the same rank as you, and it takes into account all that stuff. That's what this really feels like to me when we talk about scaling and play styles. And I wouldn't even be surprised. Yeah, somebody said it in the chat. I wouldn't even be surprised at lower ranks you could actually fight an AI. I would not be surprised. And I don't mean like AI for your placement matches. I mean, you're doing bad every once in a while and you don't know if you're fighting an AI or not. Because a billion of other fighting games have done, not fighting games, but other games have done this kind of stuff where they fill out the bottom levels of their game with AI so you can get acclimated. And I really wouldn't be surprised if Sega does some stuff like that only for the lowest ranks of the game, because that makes sense. Anybody that's like coherent in the game would never see this shit. But I truly would not be surprised if they're trying to do something like that. It's not a terrible system, it really isn't. But it is something that was only good for like the lowest rank, dude, to be real. We're talking like if you're bronze, right? And there's so many people that are below even like that rank, wherever the most players are. You need to have some sort of like wiggle room for those folks, because fighting games are tough, man. It's tough to keep people interested in the online. That's just my presumption of some of the stuff that they could do. But the problem with that is that you need a lot of people. You need a whole bunch of people for that to work. Daishi Odashima is involved in the project. I gotta look that person up. RGG Studio assisted with the development. The main concept is Battle Universe, an open space where you can spectate fights. Okay. Interesting. It sounds very similar to what Tekken and Street Fighter do, maybe. Development began in 2021, but early ideas for the title go back to almost 10 years ago. And that lines up. See, this lines up because for a while there was teases that Sega was interested in doing stuff with Virtua Fighter back in the 2010s. But it didn't happen because a lot of the Japanese side of the game industry was not doing super great back in the early 2010s. So like the 2012 to 2015s. It wasn't going great for a lot of sides of the industry over there. Capcom, Sega, Bandai Namco, even Square Enix was not doing great. So it was a tough growing period of like the HD era for most of these big studios. And this was where I think we eventually heard some of this stuff where it's like, we want to bring Virtua Fighter back, but only if we can revolutionize with it. Where they were saying something along the lines of, you know, what the current dev was saying, that we want to do something with VF, but for every single Virtua Fighter, like set by Yu Suzuki himself, the god, you have to do something crazy innovative. There has to be something that pioneers the fighting game genre forward. And that's what every Virtua Fighter did before Virtua Fighter 5, and even including Virtua Fighter 5. Something hugely expanded how this shit will work. So anyway, that lines up. That makes a lot of sense, considering where these rumors could be coming from. And yeah, apparently all major platforms, PC and current gen hardware. Kinda sick. So here's some things about this that have, that some people seem to be worried about. And it's right here. Online and esports focused. This is where a lot of contention is coming out from apparent Virtua Fighter fans, or just maybe casual fighting game fans, that are like, they see the term a focused esports game and they freak out. They're like, oh my god, this... I don't blame them, because that is sort of set as a precedent from what happened with Street Fighter 5. Street Fighter 5 essentially poisoned fighting games to be focused on esports. And it's just because the way that game was developed and what it came out as, and it was not the product everybody wanted, and they're like, oh, so these esports fighting games suck ass, right? Here is the reality of that situation. Virtua Fighter is the esports fighting game, bro. And I know that might seem weird to some to hear that, because Virtua Fighter has been out of the limelight for such a long time, even recently coming back with Ultimate Showdown. But like, if you want to talk about the first fighting game that actually was an esport, maybe like 15 years before the term esport even was thought of being a thing, that is VF. It might not have seemed like it across the world, but truly, esports and fighting games boil down to Virtua Fighter in Japan in the mid-90s. It's huge. And Virtua Fighter goes on to be like, I'm going to pull up some documented records. Hold on a second. Virtua Fighter goes on to be like the big esport fighting game all the way until like Street Fighter 4 in the late 2010s, where the respected game that you play in Japan is no shit Virtua Fighter. This is from 1994, dude. Looking relatively similar to esports events that happen nowadays. This is 1994 for Virtua Fighter 2 and 1. Like, brother, they have been doing this shit for so long. And don't get me wrong, there were other big tournaments like this for Togeki, sure. But really, like, Sega completely embraced Virtua Fighter as being like a sport. It's a video game sport in Japan. So what did that do? It sort of stemmed a huge amount of players, which are now some of the best fighting game players there are. Guess where they came from? Fucking VF, man. They came from like VF4 and VF5 way back in the day. So this isn't even there. Like, this is way before that. This is now ancient history. So I'm just saying that if we're talking about like, this is way before Capcom stuff. Street Fighter is like a casual game at this point where it just obviously has some big FGCs here and there. But in Japan, this is massive. And Virtua Fighter is huge, you know? So, and it doesn't even like stop here. Hold on a second. I have several examples because I've been watching these videos for a hell of a long time. VF3 tournament finals. 1997 Joyopolis, bro. So it already had been going for like 3 years. And granted, things like Togeki and stuff like that were like a bunch of different fighting games. But this is the mid-90s, man. Before what is like a modern esport for fighting games, like the beginning of fighting game esports kind of boils down to, in a worldwide capacity, like Street Fighter 4 era. Around and after Street Fighter 4 is sort of where this was. So is it crazy to think that 15 years before that, Virtua Fighter was esports and this shit up? All the way to like the late 2010s in Japan, where Virtua Fighter was like the main game you play, especially VF5. So, nah, I'm not with you. The people that look at this and are worried about that, that's sort of balanced by the fact that customization's in here, story is in here, all this extra crazy stuff is in here. That seems like they're aware we have to make a game with content and it can't just be an arcade game. I'm cool with that, man. That's great. That's where you're actually going to grab people. The only thing this doesn't mention is obviously like a free-to-play mode in some kind, so I don't know if that's going to be the case, but still, it's crazy exciting. Yeah, this might be hitting in the same way that previous Virtua Fighter games did, where some of the best console sales that Virtua Fighter got was either in crazy graphics or a ton of modes, and that's going back to VF2 and like VF4 Evo. So don't worry, people see this esports thing and get worried about this. We're literally talking about the one fighting game franchise that goes back to being a competitive esport almost more than Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Like, truly, in certain regions of the world, people were making big money off playing friggin' VF and nowhere else. It was just Japan. I'm super excited about this. This is like the first beginning, like a small tease at what could potentially be a whole bunch of like crazy announcements for fighting games this year. And it's like, oh, wow, maybe this is what we're looking forward to. Maybe this is the stuff we weren't realizing it was there, but possibly could be showing up now because VF clearly didn't show up during that big Sega announcement back at the Game Awards. So anyway, I'm hell of excited, man. And to think that we could finally be playing a Virtua Fighter game online that doesn't suck online, might be able to fall in love with it just as much as we did with like Tekken 8, where it's like, oh my god, we can actually play this game online now. I hope Yu Suzuki's involved in some way. I don't know if it's necessary, but just getting Yu Suzuki, you know, the god of Sega in the 90s and the 80s, just get him involved in some way, and I'm thrilled. And I think they'll probably do that. So anyway, I'm ready for VF to come back. And I think a lot of other people might be as well.